I'm talking to Barry Solomon. Today is June.
It's okay.
Did you
No,
say?
she kicked the camera.
You're going. You're on.
Oh, I'm talking to Barry Solomon. Today is June 27th, 2011, and I'm interviewing him for the archives of the Dallas Jewish Historical Society. Barry, where were you born?
I was born in Dallas, Texas, August 22nd, 1926, St. Paul Hospital. And by the way, my name is Barnett Solomon, and the nickname is Barry. So
Well, would
the
you like
archives
to be
need
called,
to know that.
Okay. Would you like to be called Barry or Barnett?
Barry.
Okay, Barry. Tell me, was your family born here as well?
But not in Dallas, no. My mother came to Dallas in 1906 with her family from New York City. She was 3 years old at the time. My father came here from New York City right after World War I, about 2 years later in 1920.
He was born in New York City, too?
No, as a matter of fact, my father was born in Bluefields, Nicaragua, Central America.
What got him there?
Well, his father and mother, for one thing. My grandfather was a businessman, and he had holdings in Central America. And he went down there at a very early age and built and lost a fortune. But my grandmother on my paternal side was born in Matamoros, Mexico. Actually, the home was across the border in Texas, but the store was in Matamoros. She didn't like to say that because she felt that people would think she was a Mexican instead of an American. But she lived in Austin for many years.
Is that what got you out of Nicaragua?
Well, it was my father.
Your father?
Well, when he was about 14 years of age, his parents sent him up to the United States for further education.
Mm-hmm.
And he attended Tennessee Military Institute, TMI, in Sweetwater, Tennessee. So that brought him back to the United States. And after that time, I don't think he ever went back to Central America because the family eventually moved to New Orleans.
New Orleans, yeah. Where did you go to school in Dallas?
Well, I went to grade school at John Henry Brown in South Dallas, and then had 1 year at Forest Avenue High School. And then my folks moved to East Dallas, and I graduated from Woodrow Wilson High School in May of 1943.
Growing up, did you have any Jewish affiliations?
Well, yes, I attended, of course, the whole family went to Congregation Shereth Israel. I also attended Hebrew school at the old Dallas Hebrew School in South Dallas. I was bar mitzvahed at Shereth Israel. And that's pretty much it.
Tell me about your experiences in school as far as being Jewish. Did you experience any anti-Semitism?
Not really. In school, I never did really. Either I was too young to recognize it or I ignored it. But in Brown School, many of the, and as far as that in Forest Avenue, many of the children were Jewish. So it wasn't a problem, really. It was more a problem out of school than in school, if there was a problem.
Did your whole family stay in South Dallas, or did they migrate north?
My parents, as I mentioned, moved to East Dallas when I was in high school. And then later on, they built a home out near White Rock Lake.
Do you have any brothers and sisters?
Yes, I have one brother, and he's 6 years older than I am. And as a side, my wife has one sister, and my brother is married to my wife's sister, and so we're a very tight-knit family.
Yeah, to say the least. To say the least. How many children do you have, and how many children does he have? And have they retained the same closeness?
Yes, we lost one daughter in infancy, but we have 3 children. We have 2 boys and a girl, and my brother and sister-in-law have 2 boys and a girl. So
Around the same age?
double cousins. Some. Ours are older because there's 6 years difference in our ages, brother and sister and sister.
I understand your father had a very interesting career. Will you tell us a little bit?
Before World War I, my father went to work for Macy's in New York in the display department, primarily as a sign writer. In those days, all the window displays had signs giving prices and what the objects were. They don't do too much of the prices in windows anymore. And following that, he went into World War I. And
His name?
Theodore. Ted Solomon. After World War I, he went back to New York City and was working at Macy's when he answered a blind newspaper ad looking for a display director in Dallas, Texas. And that was all he knew. And in 1920, he came down and applied for the job and got it, and worked there until he retired at the age of about 73. 70. Actually, he was 70, I think, when he retired. But he was the display director for A. Harrison Company, which was a prominent department store in those days.
Yes, it was. And he was in theater as well.
As a hobby, he was very interested in amateur theatrics, and was not only an actor in the Dallas Little Theater, but also spent a lot of time designing scenery and constructing scenery for all of the theatrical productions that they put on. He loved it very much.
And your mother, was she born in Dallas?
No, my mother was born in New York City and came here in 1906 at the age of 3, so she was almost born here. And a little bit about my mother was one of 9 children whose mother died at the age of 39. My mother was a sophomore in high school when her mother passed away. So she immediately had to quit school and help in the house, take care of the younger children. She had 2 older siblings, one being a woman, another being the man, and the man, of course, went to work, the young fella, and between my mother and her older sister, they took care of the younger kids and kept house, because my grandfather had to work.
Your mother's name?
Sadie Angrist Solomon. And later on, when the family grew up a little older, my mother went to work at A. Harrison Company, and that's how she met my father.
Oh, doing in sales?
My mother was in the millinery department, selling ladies' hats. And the story goes, a little humor on the side, that my father, being the display director, was fixing the mannequins in the window one day, dressing them, and he came to the millinery department and he needed a black hat, black woman's hat. And my mother, being a coy little girl of 17 or 18, said, "What shade of black?" So that piqued his interest, and they fell in love and got married in Dallas at Cherith, Israel, the same place I was married, my wife and I.
And your grandfather on your mother's side?
Grandfather on my mother's side.
He's the one that had 9 children.
He's the one that had 9 children. He was born in Ostrolanki, Poland, and he came to the United States, I believe he was about 9 years old. And he settled in New York and got into the printing trade. He was a printer. In fact, he printed my mother's wedding invitation. No, excuse me. He printed his own wedding invitation, which I had no copy of. And later on, a lot of the family had settled in Dallas, and he decided to come to Dallas and be with the family since the children were beginning to come along, 9. When he got to Dallas, he found out that he could no longer get a loan for the large sum of money it took to start a print shop. So he went to work for one of the relatives running a saloon, not a bar, a saloon. In those days, it was in downtown Dallas, right near where the old Dallas Times-Herald newspaper building used to be. And he said it was a prime location because it was right on the outskirts of the red light district, so he got the customers going in and coming out. Later, he went to work, this is my grandfather on my mother's side, he went to work at Magnolia Oil, which later became Mobil, which later became Exxon. And he worked in the Magnolia building downtown for many years.
Was it hard for him to raise 9 children, or did the sisters take the brunt of it?
I can't answer whether it was hard or not. To know Papa, you would never think it was hard, but he did have some outstanding children that helped along the way because, for instance, the youngest child in that family of the 9, Esther Rose, was only 10 years older than I was. So they ran the gamut, and the older girls made it very easy, and as they got married, the next one would step up and take care of Papa.
So where are you in this chain?
Where am I? Well,
as far as age?
at my age, 85 in August this year.
Yeah. But are you one of the youngest?
No. No, I have one cousin older than I am by 3 weeks.
I see.
Shirley Angus Rubin.
I meant in the family of 9.
In the family of 9?
Where were you?
Well, I wasn't in that family of 9. It was my mother.
Oh, I'm sorry.
was my
I'm
mother.
confused. I
Yeah.
got confused. It was your mother.
I was-
Well, then where was your mother in that family who raised?
3, number 3 from the oldest.
And the oldest was?
Beatrice Angrist Goldberg.
Yeah.
And then was Isidore Angrist, and then my mother.
There's some military activity careers in your family. Tell me a little bit about those. Going back to your grandfather who immigrated.
Well, my grandfather didn't immigrate. Are you talking about my paternal grandfather?
Yes.
My paternal grandfather was born in New Orleans.
Your
Okay.
maternal boy.
That's my
Born in-
father's father.
Okay,
born
but
in
your
New Orleans.
maternal.
My maternal grandfather was born in Ostrolanka, Poland.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And he immigrated here when he was 9 years old.
Oh. Okay. Okay.
Mhm.
With his family, with his.
He was 9 years old. He just came with an older relative, I suppose.
And any brothers and sisters that were in the military? Any brothers?
Of mine? I have one brother, Lawrence Lee Solomon. He was in the National Guard. He was not in the Army, but he was in the National Guard for a number of years.
And so were you?
No, I was, during World War II, I was in the Navy, Naval Air Corps. I was a turret gunner on a torpedo bomber.
How old were you?
Well, I joined while I was still 17, but I was 18 a short time thereafter. And shortly after I joined, I don't think there's any connection, but about a year later the war was over. I don't like to think I won it by myself, but I got home on the night of my 20th birthday. And everybody was celebrating my birthday sitting on the front porch. And I wasn't even there until rather late in the evening.
Were there any Jewish organizations that you were connected with growing up?
Not really bona fide Jewish organizations. After World War II, a lot of Jewish guys got together and had various clubs, and I was in an all-male club we would call the Hustlers. And we used to have New Year's Eve parties, and we had football games and baseball games and things of that nature. There were probably about 20 of us.
This was before you met your wife.
Yes, and after we met, yes.
Where was your wife? Where was your wife's family from?
Okay.
And her name. What is her name?
My wife's name is Teresa Kessner Solomon, and her father, Joe Kessner, immigrated from Russia, Minsk, when he was 18 years old, came to this country, and came in through the port of Galveston and had relatives in Dallas, came up to Dallas, and he started work in the old country when he was 12 years old as a tailor, and he was an apprentice. And so that was his lifelong work. And when he got to Dallas, eventually after the Depression, he went to work for Neiman and Marcus during the Depression and worked there for about 44 years. Strictly women's clothing. He was the ace on women's clothing. He also did work as a furrier. In those days, in order to make a fur coat, they made it from the pelts. And they would get up on the roof of the Neiman Marcus building and lay the pelts out so they could grade them in the sunlight, because you could not do it under false, incandescent lighting in those days.
Kidding.
So that's kind of an interesting little aside.
No kidding.
And my mother-in-law, let's see, Shirley Stoller Kessner, she too was born in Russia, and her family immigrated to New York City, where she lived for quite a few years.
We haven't talked about your children. Do they live in Dallas?
They all live in the Dallas area, Plano and Dallas, yes. And I have two sons, one daughter. I'll start with the youngest.
Their names?
That's Scott Andrew Solomon, and his wife is Tracy, and they have two boys. The next oldest son is Scott works for an electronic communications company in the real estate department. He travels all over the southeastern part of the United States on real estate deals. The other boy is David Stewart Solomon. He works for Texas Instruments. He's been there about 31 years. He's the vice president in the human resources. He travels all over the world. My daughter, Carol Lynn Solomon Goldberg, is a nurse. She works for a large pediatric office here in Dallas. She's the nurse administrator, has 42 nurses reporting to her. Mm-hmm. So all of the kids are employed and they're very busy. They're all married. I forgot to mention, David is married to Susan. They have two boys and a daughter.
You have two boys.
One a CPA.
Mm-hmm.
One just has his master's in advertising, and another one is in college as a junior.
Well, I have a feeling that you're a great-grandfather.
Not yet. They're too bashful. Now, I forgot to mention my daughter Carol has 3 children. She has 2 girls and 1 boy. The 2 girls are both school teachers. The boy is a pilot for American Airlines. So that takes care of the children and their children. And a couple of them are married and a couple of them are still searching.
They all live in Dallas?
Yes. One boy lives in New York City, but he's moving back to Dallas this month.
That's a victory.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to go back to living in South Dallas. Did you go to college while you lived in South Dallas?
No, we had, the folks had moved to East Dallas by that time when I graduated from Woodrow Wilson High School. Yeah, I went to North Texas Agricultural College, which became Arlington State College, which is now the University of Texas at Arlington. So that school has been under several banners. I went 1 year before I went into the service. I went 1 year when I got out of service. And then I quit school for a while and continued after I got married by correspondence, which today would be the same as taking college courses on the internet.
That's
So
right.
that's the way I completed my education, is by correspondence.
What is or was your occupation?
Well, I studied mechanical engineering, and for the first few years of my career, I dealt pretty much in engineering draftsman and design, that type of thing. Later, and by the way, my first employment was with Western Union. They had recently taken over Postal Telegraph, which was another large telegraph company in the world, and they were consolidating all of their plant around the country. So I worked there for a couple of years and got an opportunity to go to work for General Electric, where I worked for about 5 years. And from General Electric, in 1953, I went to work for Texas Instruments. And I retired from Texas Instruments after 36 years. Most of my things at Texas Instruments after about the first 7 years or so was in management of one type or another. And I retired when I was 63 years old in 1989 on a Friday, and they hired me back as a consultant. I went to work in the same office with the same secretary the next Monday. So I worked as a consultant on special projects for Texas Instruments for about a year after I retired.
Full-time?
About half-time, yeah. And I decided, I thought I was retired, why am I working? So we eventually brought that to a close, and I actually could retire and do the things I wanted to do.
Do you
So I
have
was there 37 years in all.
Do you have any hobbies? Tell me about your hobbies.
Oh, hobbies. As a youth, I was very interested in model airplane construction and building and flying model airplanes. And later on, starting about 51 years ago, I got interested in singing in a barbershop harmony group. I had sung in the choir as a young boy at Sheriff Israel, and I did a little bit in high school, but then this appealed to me. So back in 1961, I joined the Barbershop Harmony Society, and I've been in it ever since, been active in it in both quartet and chorus work. And nowadays, our chorus sings at many of the senior citizens communities around the Metroplex.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, we've sung probably about all of them, including we've sung at the Che.
Same quartet?
No. I've been in several quartets, but I'm not in the quartet at the present time. Just do chorus work now.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And by the way, it might be interesting to note that my father was also in a quartet. And in 1922, I believe it was, they opened up radio station WRR in Dallas, the quartet he was singing with. So that's a little aside I'd like to mention.
That's
So the
interesting.
acorn doesn't fall far from the tree.
Who are your role models?
My role models, golly. I don't know, that's a tough one. I never stopped to think about that before. I think some of the role models could be, in a way, parents.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I mention that is people who lived through some of the harder times of the last century, primarily the Great Depression, when many people were out of work and one thing or another, how they held their families together
America.
and kept moving has always been sort of a thing to me. I lived on the fringes of that because I was a young boy, but I never had the responsibilities for raising a family. Now, we've had some poor recessionary periods here lately in the Dallas, in fact, in the United States, but I don't believe as a provider for a family that it affected my family like the families in those days. So I'd say that those are sort of my heroes.
Were your, I was going to ask, were your parents affected by the Depression?
Oh, yes, I believe everyone was one, to some extent. I remember my mother, in those days, in a department store, you got paid in cash, okay? And my father would get paid every Saturday. So one day, this during the Depression, he had his salary cut 10%. Well, what went on was my younger brother had just been born,
His name?
Lawrence, and they had just bought a new automobile. But what happened was 5 Saturdays in a row, his salary was cut 10%.
Oh, 50%.
So not really. I used to joke with my mother. I said, well, you know, look at it this way. It was always less money because we were taking 10% out of less salary. But people weathered the storm. We never went hungry. We didn't miss any meals. But I'm sure that the problems my folks had in those days, and my father-in-law and mother-in-law, was evident, but not too much to young people, 10, 12, 13 years old.
Was from your mother's family, where there was 9 brothers and sisters, were you closely connected with them? Was
Extremely closely connected family, extremely. Every Jewish holiday, especially things like Passover, we were all together. And it was a madhouse. Lots of little kids up to older kids running around, the grandchildren and so forth. And we were very, very close-knit family, and still are to this day with the remainder of the family.
Were the grandchildren, were your parents, were any of the brothers and sisters of 9, were any of them in the service in the Army, and how did they?
Yes, I had an older cousin, Julian Goldberg, who was in the Seabees up in the Aleutian Islands. I had an uncle, Milton Falk, who was in the Army, and he was in during World War II, as well as Korea and Vietnam, I believe. And one uncle, my youngest uncle, was in the Army. He was killed in France about D-Day +6, right after the invasion. And I was in the Navy, so there was 4 of us. 3 of us survived.
What was it like growing up, as far as, are things different today as you remember? How has Dallas changed in your view?
Well, there's many differences today. For instance, I could go downtown when I was 10 or 11 years old on the streetcar for 3 cents, and nobody thought that was hazardous. I could go down to where my grandfather worked or my father worked, at 11, 12 years old. Nobody thought that was a bad thing. Today, I don't think you'd be doing much of that. First of all, downtown's not what it, today is not what it was in those days. But there was quite a bit of difference. There was segregation. There was obviously segregation, but a lot of the Jewish people that lived in South Dallas had help from the black community in their homes. And people were treated just like members of the family. There was not what people would think is segregation today. And then again, when you got on the streetcar, they had certain areas where the black people would sit and certain areas where the white people would sit. They had water fountains that were white, water fountains for the black. It was different times. And the city was a lot smaller, but the people that lived in it didn't realize that. To them, it was a big city because you could go to other places, around like Grand Prairie, Arlington. Those were little towns. So this city seemed big when it had 260,000 people. But
that was a big city in those days.
In those days. But I can remember parades downtown. You could go down there as a child, and just fantastic times all over the city. You could walk on any street, any part of the city, nighttime, daytime. You didn't lock your house. You didn't take your car keys out of your car. Just different.
Is there anything that I haven't covered you'd want to share with us?
Well-
Seems like I've covered family, careers,
Yeah.
Jewish interests, what it was like.
Well, I can't think of anything really that would be of interest, great interest. I have watched Dallas grow, but those that came before me watched it grow too, just in a different dimension.
You're so lucky to have your children here.
Really am.
Mary.
I'm very, very fortunate in that respect.
Are any of your aunts and uncles alive now?
No.
Have they all?
No.
The last one sounds like Esther Rose.
Esther Rose Raskin, Esther Rose Angus Raskin was the baby of the family. She's the one that was 10 years older than me, so she passed away recently.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, it's been my pleasure. I hope I told you what you would like to know.
I think it was very, very